Oh, flip ground. Ooh, whoops. Okay. What is it I wanted? Sorry, you guys can stare. That's what. It doesn't matter. It. This one fits. Thing. Anyways, I'm just. Okay. Oh. Okay. Gonna put this comment. there. It's classic story revolution. Book the first recalled to it was the best of it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, reality. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness, a season of hope, a season of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing. We were all going back to heaven. We were all going sure the period. Some of its noisiest authority insisted on its being for good or superlative degree. There was there were a king with a plain face on the throne of England. There were a king with a large fair face on the throne of France. In both countries, it's clear that still to the Lord of the state preserves of loaves and fishes that settled forever. It was the year of our Lord, 700. Spiritual revelations were that favorite period, so as at this. Mrs. Stouthcott, oh whoops, Mrs. had 5 and 20 private in the lifeguards had heralded this by announcing that arrangements were made for the swallow in Westminster. Even the Cuckling Ghost had lain only a round dozen of after wrapping up its messages as the spirits of the Severians passed for naturally originality wrapped out theirs messages in the earthly world had lately come to the English crown and people of British subjects in which, strange to state, had proved more important to the human race than any communications yet received any of the chicken tackling. France, less favored on the whole as to matters spiritual, and her sister the shield and trident, exceeding making for money and spending. Under the guidance of her Christian pastors, she entertained herself, besides such achievements. The sentencing used to have his hands cut off, his tongue worn out with pincers, and his body burned alive because he had down in the to honor to a dirty procession of monks which had passed within his view at a distance of some 50 or 60. It is likely enough that, rooted in the woods of France and Norway, there were growing trees when that sufferer was put to death, already marked by the woodman fate to come down and be sawn into boards to make a certain movable framework with a sack and a knife in it, terrible in history. It is likely enough that in the rough outhouses of some tillers of the adjacent to Paris, there were sheltered from the weather that very day rude carts, bespattered with rustic mire, snuffed out by pigs, and roosted in by poultry, which the farmer, Death, had already set apart to be umbrils of the revolution. But that woodman and that farmer, though they work unceasingly, work silent, and no one heard them. They went up tread, muffled tread, the rather, for as much as to entertain any suspicion that they were awake, was to be ethical and traitorous. In England, there was scarcely an amount of order and protection to justify national during burglaries by armed men and highway robberies took place in the capital itself every night. Families were publicly cautioned not to go out of town without removing their furniture to a warehouses for security. A highwayman in the dark was a city tradesman in being recognized and challenged by his fellow tradesmen, stopped in his character of the captain, gallantly shot him through the head and rode away. The mail was waylaid by 7 robbers, and the guard shot 3 dead, then got shot dead himself by the other 4, in consequence of the failure of his engine, after which the mail was robbed in peace. That magnificent potentate, Lord Mayor of London, was made to stand and deliver on Turnham Gray by one highwayman who despoiled the illustrious creature in sight of his retinue. Prisoners in London fought battles with their turnkeys in the majesty of the hired blunderbusses in loaded with rounds of shot. Thieves snipped off diamond crowns from the lord at court drawing rooms. The musketeers went into St. Giles to search for contraband goods, and the mob fired on the musketeers, and the musketeers fired on the mob, and nobody thought any of these occurrences much out of the common way. In the midst of them, the hangman, ever busy and ever worse than useless, was in constant requisition, now stringing up long rows of miscellaneous criminals, now hanging the housebreaker on Saturday, who had been taken on Tuesday, now burning people in the hand at Newgate by the dozen, and now burning pamphlets at the door of Westminster Hall. Today, taking the life of an atrocious murderer, and tomorrow of a wretched pilferer who had robbed a farmer's boy of sixpence. All these things, and 1,000 like them, came to pass in close old year 1770. Environed by them, while the woodman and the farmer were completed, those two of the large jaw, those other two of the plain and fair faces, it was stirring up, and carried their divine rights with a high hand. Thus did the year 1775 conduct their greatness. And myriads of small creatures, the creatures of this chronicle, passed along the roads that bore them. Chapter 2. The Mail. It was the Dover Road on a late November. Most of the person. This history has business. The Dover Road lay, as to him, beyond the Dover Mail as it lumbered up. He walked up the hill in the side of the mail, not because they had the least relish exercise under the circumstances, but because the hill, the harness, and the mud and the mail were all so heavy that the horses had 3 times already come to a stop beside once drawing the coach across the road with the mutinous intent of taking it back to Blackheath. Reins and whip and coachman and guard, however, in combination, had read that article of war, made a purpose otherwise strongly in favor of the argument that some brute animals are induced, and the team had capitulated and returned to their duty. With the drooping heads and tremulous tails, they mashed their way through thick mud, floundering and stumbling between them, as if they were falling to pieces at the large joints. Turn the music down just a little. Should be okay. As often as the driver rested them and brought them to a stand with a wary "Wo-ho, so-ho then," the near leader violently shook his head and everything upon it, like the unusually emphatic horse, denying that the coach could be got up the hill. Whatever the leader made this rattle, the passenger started, as a nervous passenger might, and was disturbed in mind. There was a steaming mist in all the hollows, and it had roamed in its forlornness up the hill like an evil spirit, seeking rest and finding none. A clammy and intensely cold mist, it made its slow way through the air in ripples that visibly followed and overspread one another as the waves of an unwholesome sea might do. It was dense enough to shut out everything from the light of the coach lamps, but these its own workings and a few yards of road, and the reek of the laboring horses steamed into it as if they had made it all. 2 other passengers beside the one were plodding up the hill by the side of the mail. All 3 were wrapped to the cheekbones and over the ears, and wore jack boots. Not one of the 3 could have said, from anything he saw, that either of the other 2 was like, and each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his 2 companions. In those days, travelers were very shy of being confidential on a short notice, for anyone on the road might be a robber or in league with robbers. As to the latter, when every posting house and alehouse could produce somebody in the captain's pay, ranging from the landlord to the lowest stable nondescript, it was the likeliest thing upon the cards. So the guard of the Dover Mail thought to himself that Friday night in November 1775, lumbering up Shooter's Hill as he stood on his own particular perch behind the mail, beating his feet and keeping an eye and a hand on the armed chest before him, where a loaded blunderbuss lay on top of 6 or 8 loaded horse pistols deposited on a substratum of cutlass. The Dover mail was in its usual genial position that the guard suspected the passengers suspected one another and the guard, and they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horse, as to which cattle he could with a clear conscience have taken his oath on the two testaments that they were not fit for the journey. Well, ho, said the coachman, so then, one more pull and you're at the top, and be damned to you, for I have trouble enough to let you get to it. Joe. Holla, the guard replied. What o'clock do you make it, Joe? 10 minutes good, past 11. My blood, ejaculated the vexed coachman, and not atop the shooters yet. Ha! Get on with you. The emphatic horse, cut short by the whip in the most decided negative, made a decided scramble for it, and the three other horses followed suit. Once more, the Dover mail struggled on with the jack-boots of its passengers, squashing along by its side. They had stopped when the coach stopped, and they kept close company with it. If any of the three had had the hardihood to propose to another to walk on a little ahead into the midst and the darkness, he would have put himself in a fair way of getting shot instantly as a highwayman. The last burst carried forth the mail to the summit of the hill. The horses stopped to breathe again, and the guard got down to skid the wheel for the descent and opened the coach door to let the passengers in. Joe cried the coachman in a warning voice, looking down from his box. What do you say, Tom? They both listened. I say a horse at a canter coming up, Joe. I say a horse at a gallop, Tom, returned the guard, leaving his hold of the door and mounting nimbly into his place. Gentlemen, in the king's name, all of you. With this hurried adjuration, he cocked his blunderbuss and stood on the offensive. The passenger booked by this history was on the coach step, getting in. The other passengers were close behind him and about to follow. He remained on the step, half in the coach and half out of. They remained in the road behind him. They all looked from the coachman to the guard, and from the guard to the coachman, and listened. The coachman looked back, and the guard looked back, and even the emphatic leader pricked up his ears and looked back without contradicting. Stillness consequent on the cessation of the rumbling and laboring of the coach, added to the stillness of the night, made it very quiet indeed. The panting of the horses communicated a tremulous motion to the coach, as if it were in a state of agitation. The hearts of the passengers beat loud enough that perhaps to be heard, but at any rate the quiet pause was audibly expressive of people out of breath and holding the breath and having the pulses quickened by expectation. The sound of a horse at a gallop came fast and furiously up the hill. So ho, the guards sang out as loud as he could roar. Yo there, stand, I shall fire. The pace was suddenly checked, and with much splashing and floundering, a man's voice called from the mist. Is that the Dover mail? Never you mind what it is, the guard retorted. What are you? Is that the Dover mail? Why do you want to know? I want a passenger if it is. What passenger? Mr. Jarvis Lorry. Our booked passenger showed in a moment that it was his name. The guard, the coachman, and the two other passengers eyed him distrustfully. Keep where you are, the guard called to the voice in the midst, because if I should make a mistake, it could never be set right in your lifetime. Gentlemen, the name of Lorry answers straight. What is the matter? Asked the passenger, then with mildly quavering speech. Who wants me? Is it Jerry? I don't like Jerry's voice if it is Jerry, growled the guard to himself. He's hoarser than suits me as Jerry. Yes, Mr. Lorry. What is the matter? A dispatch sent after you from over yonder, Tea and Company. I know this messenger, guard, said Mr. Lorry, getting down into the road, assisted from behind more swiftly than politely by the other two passengers, who immediately scrambled into the coach, shut the door, and pulled up the window. He may come close. There's nothing wrong. I hope there ain't, but you can't make so nation sure of that, said the guard in gruff soliloquy. Hello, you. Well, and hello you, said Jerry, more hoarsely than before. Come on at a foot pace, do you mind me? And if you got holsters to that saddle of yourn, don't let me see your hand go nigh them. For I'm a devil at a quick mistake, and when I make one it takes the form of lead. Now let's look at you. Figures of a horse and rider came slowly through the eddying mist and came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. The rider stopped and, casting up his eyes at the guard, handed the passenger a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown. Both horse and rider were covered with mud, and the hoofs of the horse to the hat of the man. Guard, said the passenger in a tone of quiet business confidence. Watchful guard. It might be a little too... No. Guard, says the passenger, a tone of quiet business confidence. The watchful guard, with his right hand at the stock of his raced blunderbuss, his left at the barrel, and his eye to the horseman, answered curtly, "Sir, there's nothing to apprehend. I belong to Tolson's Bank. You must know Tolson's Bank in London. I'm going to Paris on business. A crown to drink. May I read this? If it so be as you're quick, sir." He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on that side, and read first to himself and then aloud. "Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. It's not long, you see, guard. Jerry say that?" My answer was, "Recalled to life." Jerry started in a saddle. "That's a blazing strange answer, too," said he as at his hoarsest. "Take that message back, and they will know that I received this as well as if I wrote. Make the best of your way. Good night." With those words, the passenger opened the coach door and got in, not at all assisted by his fellow passengers, who had expeditiously secreted their watches and purses in their boots, and were now making a general pretense of being asleep, with no more definite purpose than to escape the hazard of originating any other kind of action. The coach slumbered again, with heavier wreaths of mist closing around it as it began the descent. The guard soon replaced his blunderbuss in his arm chest, and having looked to the rest of its contents, and having looked to the supplementary pistols that he wore in his belt, looked to a smaller chest beneath his feet, in which there were a few smith's tools, a couple of torches, and a tinder box, for he was furnished with that completeness, as if the coach lamps had been blown and stormed out, which did occasionally happen. He had only to shut himself up inside, keep the flint and steel sparks as well off the straw, and get a light with tolerable safety and ease, if you were lucky, in 5 minutes. Tom, softly over the coach roof. "Hello, Joe. Did you hear the message?" "I did, Joe." "What did you make of it, Tom?" "Nothing at all, Joe." "That's coincidence, too," the guard mused, "for I make the same of it myself." Jerry, left alone in the mist and darkness, dismounted meanwhile, not only to ease his spent horse, but to wipe the mud from his face and shake the wet out of his hat brim, which might be capable of holding about half a gallon. After standing with the bridle over his heavily splashed arm until the wheels of the mail were no longer within hearing and the night was quite still again, he turned to walk down the hill. After that there galloped from Temple Bar, old lady. "I won't trust your forelegs till I get you on the level," said the horse messenger, glancing at his mare, recalled to life. "That's a blazing strange message. Much of that wouldn't do for you, Jerry. I say, Jerry, you'd be in a blazing bad way if recalling to life was coming to fashion, Jerry." 3. The Night Shadows. A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. A solemn consideration when I enter a great city by night, that every one of those darkly clustered houses encloses its own secret, that every room in every one of them encloses its own secret, that every beating heart in the hundreds of thousands of breasts there is, in some of its imaginings, a secret to the heart nearest it. Something of the awfulness, even of death itself, is referable to this. No more can I turn the leaves of this dear book that I loved, and vainly hope in time to read it all. No more can I look into the depths of this unfathomable water wherein its momentary lights glanced into it. I have had glimpses of buried treasure and other things submerged. It was appointed that the book should wait with the spring forever and ever. When I had read but a page, it was appointed that the water should be locked in eternal frost when the light was playing on its surface, and I stood in ignorance on the shore. My friend is dead. My neighbor is dead. My love, the darling of my soul, is dead. It is the exonerable consolidation and perpetuation of the secret that was always in that individuality, in which I shall carry in mind to my life's end. And that in any of the burial places of the city through which I pass, there is a sleeper more inscrutable than its busy inhabitants are, in their innermost personality to me, or am I or am or than I am to them. As to this, his natural and not to be alienated inheritance, the messenger on horseback had exactly the same possessions as the king, the first minister of state, or the richest merchant in London. So with the 3 passengers shut up in the narrow compass of one lumbering old mail coach, they were mysteries to one another, as complete as if each had been in his own coach and 6, or his own coach and 60, with the breadth of a county between him and the next. The messenger rode back in an easy trot, stopping pretty often at alehouses by the way to drink, but evincing a tendency to keep his own counsel, and to keep his hat cocked over his eyes. He had eyes that assorted very well with that decoration, being of a surface black with no depth in the color or form, and much too near together, as if they were afraid of being found out on something singly if they had kept too far apart. They had a sinister expression under an old cocked hat, like a three-cornered spittoon, and over a great muffler for the chin and throat, which descended nearly to the wearer's knees. When he stopped for a drink, he moved this muffler with his left hand, only while he poured his liquor in with his right. As soon as that was done, he muffled again. No, Jerry, no, said the messenger, harping on theme as he rode. It would do for you. Jerry, you honest tradesman, it wouldn't suit your line of business. Recalled. Bust me if I don't think he'd been a drinking. His message perplexed his mind to that degree that he was fain several times to take off his hat to scratch his head. Except on the crown, which was raggedly bald, he had stiff black hair standing jaggedly all over it, growing downhill almost to his broad, blunt nose. It was so like Smith's work, so much more like the top of a strongly spiked wall than a head of hair, that the best of players at Leapfrog might have declined him as the most dangerous man in the world to go over. While he trotted back with the message he was to deliver to the night watchman in his box at the door of Tellson's Bank by Temple Bar, was to deliver it to greater authorities within, the shadows of the night took such shapes to him as arose out of the message, and took such shapes to the mare as arose out of her private topics of uneasiness. They began to be numerous, for she shied at every shadow on the road. What time the mail coach lumbered, jolted, rattled, and bumped upon its tedious way, with its three fellow inscrutables inside, to whom likewise the shadows of the night revealed themselves in the forms of their dozing eyes and wandering thoughts suggested. Tellson's Bank had a run on it in the mail. As the bank passenger, with an arm drawn through the leathern strap which did what lay in it to keep him from pounding against the next passenger and driving him into his corner. Whenever the coach got a special jolt, nodded in his place with half-shut eyes, the little coach windows, coach light gleaming through them, and the bulky bundle of opposite passenger. Yeah, I'm not really liking this. Sorry, I'm taking off the music's gonna bug me a little. I was hoping it'd sound a little more piano, but it's a little less piano. Well, oh, I think I'm a little.